This is the story of Steve Jobs, the genius, the perfectionist, the legend. Birth and adoption, February 24th, 1955, San Francisco. A young woman gives birth to a baby boy. She is unmarried, her family disapproves. She cannot keep him. With heartbreak in her chest, she places him up for adoption. But she has one condition: the adoptive parents must be college-educated. The first family selected changes their mind at the last second. Second family steps forward. Paul Jobs and Clara Jobs, a machinist, a bookkeeper, a humble couple from Mountain View. Neither had graduated from college. At first, she refuses. Then something inside her shifts, and so a baby named Steve Jobs comes home to a small house, a quiet street, in a region that would someday become known as Silicon Valley. Steve Jobs would carry the pain of abandonment for the rest of his life, the desperate need to prove himself, the fear of being insignificant, the hunger that never ever left him. Childhood and the garage. His adoptive father, Paul, was a quiet craftsman, a man who loved building things with his hands. In the family garage stood a simple workbench, and almost as soon as Steve could walk, Paul made room for him there. Paul Jobs taught his son a lesson that would later define Apple there. The back of the cabinet matters just as much as the front. Even the parts nobody sees must be built beautifully. Steve never forgot it. Growing up in Cupertino, Steve was brilliant, but difficult. Teachers quickly realized he was far ahead of other students. Some wanted to move him forward 3 entire grades. His parents settled on 1. He was restless, easily bored, obsessed with electronics. He would take apart machines just to understand them, then rebuild them better. But there was one place where Steve found something close to peace: the endless fruit orchards of the Santa Clara Valley. He would ride his bicycle through them alone, thinking, always imagining things nobody else could yet see. ReedCon 1972. Reed College, Steve Jobs enrolls and drops out after just 1 semester. But here is the strange part. He never truly leaves. He sleeps on the floors of friends' dorm rooms, returns Coke bottles for spare change, walks miles across campus for free meals, and quietly attends classes that fascinate him. No grades, no degree, no plan, just curiosity. One of those classes is calligraphy. Steve becomes obsessed with typography, serif fonts, sans serif fonts, spacing, balance, beauty in every letter. At the time, it seems completely useless. Until 10 years later, when the Macintosh becomes the first personal computer in history to feature elegant proportional typography. Years later, Steve Jobs would say, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward." He was 18 years old, sleeping on a floor, studying calligraphy, and unknowingly building the foundation for a technological revolution. Atari and India, 1974. Steve Jobs takes a job at Atari, one of the earliest video game companies in the world. He is brilliant, but almost impossible to work with. He walks barefoot through the office, argues constantly with co-workers, rejects authority, ignores social rules completely. Complaints pile up so aggressively that management finally moves him to the night shift, just so he can work alone. And yet, everyone can see it. The intensity, the intelligence, the strange magnetic force inside him. But Steve Jobs is searching for something deeper than computers, something spiritual, something meaningful. So he leaves America behind and travels to India. He shaves his head, wears simple cotton robes, lives with very little, travels through villages and temples, searching for enlightenment, searching for clarity, searching for himself. For months, he studies spirituality and Eastern philosophy, meditation, simplicity, minimalism. And when he finally returns to California, something inside him has changed. Steve begins to believe that technology should not feel cold or mechanical. It should feel human, elegant, simple, beautiful. That belief would eventually shape every product Apple ever created. At Apple is born a small garage, Los Altos Crist Drive. History quietly begins. Steve Wozniak, the shy engineering genius, builds extraordinary hardware by hand. And Steve Jobs, the visionary, the perfectionist, the salesman, sees something much bigger. Wozniak sees a hobby. Jobs sees a revolution. At one point, Wozniak wants to give their computer designs away for free, share them openly with other enthusiasts. Steve Jobs immediately refuses. No, this is not just a toy. This is a product. April 1st, 1976. Apple is officially founded. Inside that tiny garage, two young men begin building machines that will eventually change the modern world. Then comes the Apple II, 1977. Unlike other computers of the era, it is not designed for scientists or engineers. It is friendly, elegant, easy to use. For the first time, ordinary people can imagine having a computer in their home. And suddenly, Apple explodes. By 1980, Apple goes public. The IPO becomes one of the biggest financial events in American history. Steve Jobs is just 25 years old, and overnight his net worth rises above $200 million. Most people would have stopped there. Most people would have celebrated. Not Steve Jobs. Because for him, success was never enough. There was always another mountain ahead, always another impossible dream waiting to be built. The Macintosh, 1979. Steve Jobs visits Xerox PARC, a legendary research laboratory filled with futuristic inventions. Inside the lab, engineers have already built technology years ahead of its time. A graphical user interface, icons on a screen, windows, a small pointing device called a mouse. But Xerox executives fail to understand what they are looking at. They see experiments. Steve Jobs sees the future. The moment he touches the technology, he understands instantly. He rushes back to Apple and tells his engineers, "This changes everything." And from that moment forward, Apple begins building a radically different kind of computer. January 24th, 1984. Steve Jobs walks onto a stage and introduces the Macintosh. Not like a businessman, like a showman, like a magician revealing the future. Then something astonishing happens. The Macintosh speaks, out loud, introducing itself to the audience. The crowd erupts into applause, cheers, disbelief. That moment transforms the technology industry forever. Because computers are no longer just machines. Now they feel personal, human, alive. The fall. But behind the scenes, Apple is falling into chaos. Steve Jobs is becoming increasingly difficult to work with. By nearly every account, the young Steve Jobs is brilliant and terrifying. He humiliates employees in meetings, pushes engineers beyond exhaustion, takes credit for ideas that are not entirely his own. His standards are impossible, his temper unpredictable, and at times, his behavior becomes cruel. Inside Apple's boardroom, fear begins to grow. The company is becoming enormous. Billions of dollars are now at stake, and many executives no longer believe Steve Jobs can manage it. Then comes 1985. The board of directors makes its decision. Steve Jobs is stripped of operational control from the very company he created. At 30 years old, Steve Jobs is effectively fired from Apple. The company he built in a garage no longer wants him there. Later, Jobs would describe the experience like this: "It felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, publicly humiliated, broken, lost." He sells nearly all of his Apple shares. And across Silicon Valley, many people quietly begin saying the same thing: Steve Jobs is finished. They could not have. Next and Pixar. Most people believed Steve Jobs was finished after Apple fired him. What actually happened was far more dangerous. He went back to work, not defeated, not broken, focused. He founded a new company called Next. Its mission was ambitious: build incredibly powerful computers for universities, scientists, and researchers. The machines were elegant, advanced, years ahead of their time, and painfully expensive. Next would never become a massive commercial success. But hidden inside those black computers was technology that would later become the foundation for Apple's future comeback. And then, in 1986, Steve Jobs made a decision that sounded almost absurd at the time. He purchased a small computer graphics division from filmmaker George Lucas for $10 million. Most people saw it as a rich man's hobby, a vanity project, a toy. Steve Jobs renamed the company Pixar. For years, Pixar struggled financially. The company burned money, projects failed, and many believed it would collapse completely. But Jobs kept funding it, again and again, even when it seemed irrational. Then came 1995. Pixar released Toy Story, the first fully computer-animated feature film in history. Audiences had never seen anything like it. The animation, the emotion, the storytelling, the humanity inside digital characters. The film became a global phenomenon, earning hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide. And when Pixar went public, Steve Jobs officially became a billionaire for the first time. Meanwhile, back in Cupertino, Apple Computer was collapsing. The comeback. By 1996, Apple was in crisis. The company was bleeding money, products were failing, leadership was chaotic. Some analysts believed Apple was less than 90 days away from bankruptcy. Desperate for survival, Apple made a shocking decision. It bought Next. And with Next, Steve Jobs returned, not with forgiveness, not with nostalgia, with a plan. The moment he regained influence, Jobs began cutting aggressively. Apple's bloated product line, more than 70 confusing products, was slashed down to 4. Everything unnecessary disappeared, because Jobs believed simplicity was power. Then he found the partner who would help redefine modern design. A quiet British designer named Jony Ive. Jobs gave Ive something almost unheard of in the technology industry: complete creative authority. Together they built the iMac, a computer unlike anything the world had seen before. Bright colors, transparent plastic, rounded edges, friendly shapes. It looked less like a machine and more like something from the future. And it saved Apple. But Steve Jobs was already chasing the next revolution. The iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket before the music players were awkward and frustrating, ugly menus, complicated controls, terrible design. The iPod was different, small, white, elegant, simple. One scroll wheel, thousands of songs, effortless interaction. It wasn't just a music player. It fundamentally changed the relationship between humans and technology. Devices no longer felt mechanical. They felt personal. The iPhone. January 9, 2007, San Francisco. Steve Jobs walks onto a stage wearing his now famous black turtleneck and blue jeans. Calm, confident, certain. "This," he says, "is a day I've been looking forward to for 2.5 years. Then he announces 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a breakthrough internet communication device, and a revolutionary mobile phone. The audience applauds 3 separate times, believing these are 3 different inventions. Then Steve Jobs smiles. These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. The iPhone. A single piece of glass. No physical keyboard, almost no buttons, just your fingers. The most natural interface most people had ever seen. In that moment, Steve Jobs did not simply launch a new product. He changed the trajectory of human civilization. The smartphone era begins, and the modern world changes with it. The same company that had once stood on the edge of bankruptcy becomes one of the most valuable companies in human history. The dark side. But this story is incomplete if we only speak about brilliance. Because Steve Jobs was not simply a visionary, he could also be deeply harmful to the people around him. The same intensity that drove greatness often caused pain. For years, Steve Jobs denied being the father of his daughter, Lisa Brennan Jobs. While he became extraordinarily wealthy, Lisa and her mother struggled financially. Inside Apple, many employees feared him. He publicly humiliated engineers, destroyed people emotionally in meetings, dismissed work with brutal criticism. At times, he took ideas created by others and presented them as part of his own vision. The people who helped build his products often paid an enormous personal cost. Then came 2003. Steve Jobs was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Doctors urged immediate surgery. They warned him time was critical. But Jobs delayed treatment for months. Instead, he experimented with alternative approaches, special diets, acupuncture, holistic therapies. Many doctors later believe this delay may have shortened his life. Steve Jobs was never a simple man. The contrast between the beauty of the products he created and the pain he sometimes caused others remains one of the most complicated contradictions in modern business history. The lessons. So what do we learn from a life this complicated? What do we take from Steve Jobs? Lesson 1. Taste is a skill. Beauty matters. How something looks, feels, works, all of it matters. Caring deeply about quality is not vanity. It is respect for the people who will use what you create. And taste can be developed by reading, by studying great work, by refusing to accept mediocrity. Lesson 2. Simplicity is incredibly difficult. Steve Jobs once said, "Simple can be harder than complex." True simplicity requires clarity of thought. You remove everything unnecessary until only the essential remains, and what remains becomes more powerful because of it. Lesson 3. Experts are not always right. Almost every revolutionary product Apple released was mocked in the beginning. The Mac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, even Apple's retail stores. Again and again, experts predicted failure. Again and again, they were wrong. Study deeply, listen carefully, then think for yourself. Lesson 4. Failure can become transformation. Steve Jobs later said that being fired from Apple was one of the best things that ever happened to him. It removed the weight of success, forced him to begin again, and gave him the years that created Next and Pixar. Sometimes losing everything creates space for something greater. Lesson 5. Remember that life ends. In his famous Stanford commencement address 2005, Jobs said, "Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. Because eventually, fear disappears, ego disappears, pride disappears, and only what truly matters remains." That the Legacy, October 5th, 2011. Steve Jobs dies at the age of 56. His family is beside him. According to his sister, his final words are quiet and strange. He looks beyond the people in the room. His eyes widen. Oh wow! Oh wow! Oh wow! No one knows what he saw. But perhaps it is fitting for a man who spent his entire life seeing the future before anyone else. After his death, people gathered outside Apple stores across the world. Flowers, candles, handwritten letters, silent crowds. In countries he never visited, in languages he never spoke. People mourned not because Steve Jobs was perfect. He wasn't. They mourned because he changed how humanity experiences technology itself. He created products that felt personal, thoughtful, human, not just machines, experiences. And that feeling that somebody cared enough to make something truly beautiful and intuitive may be his greatest legacy of all. Not the billions, not the stock price, not the history books, the feeling. Steve Jobs is gone, but every time someone unlocks a smartphone, watches a Pixar film, or uses technology that feels natural and human, a part of his vision is still alive. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the ones who see things differently. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Steve Jobs, 1955, 2011.